11 honors, and we are finishing up our discussion from yesterday, chapters 13 through 16. And so let's look at number 11. Stay focused, guys. Compare the way Tom Sawyer treated little Tommy Barnes for threatening to tell all the secrets of the game with the way Bill and Jake deal with Jim Turner for the same offense. So one of the, if you're listening, we're trying to teach you skills. That's what classical education, one of our hallmarks is giving you the tools of learning. And so here's a tool of learning, is in reading a novel, notice the parallels, notice the similarities. Notice that these two events separated by a dozen chapters, but notice how they're so much alike. And I think Hartley has the answer, because I think we said we had touched on it. How are those two things different, and how are they alike?
Well, I have that they went to the hill, and they're ironic because Jake also went to the hill. I don't know.
Okay, I'm not sure what that means. If I said it, I wouldn't know what I mean. Well, you know, little Tommy Barnes was that little kid who said he was going to tell. And Huck was expecting them to kill him. Now, we know that's not what they were going to do. He's a 5-year-old boy. But Huck was kind of disappointed that they didn't do that. Because it's just games. And then compare that with Bill and Jake and Jim. Those are real criminals. Those are real robbers. And so the difference between make-believe and reality. I don't know how many of you heard that, Ben. That's number 11. The difference between make-believe, that's Tom Sawyer. Romantic, kind of make-believe. And Huck Finn, he's realistic. And he lives in the real world. Remember when he pretended to be killed? That was a game too, right? But it was a game with a real purpose, to protect himself from his father, as opposed to what Tom Sawyer does. They just play games for the sake of playing games. I guess it's the difference between playing video games that are violent and being violent yourself. There may be some crossover there, I don't know, but you know, one's the real world. The real world is violent. The video game world is just make-believe. And so that's kind of what we have here. Because Jim and Bill and Jake were literally going to kill Jim Turner. They were going to do what Tom threatened to do to the little Tommy Barnes. They really were going to kill this guy because that's the real world. All right, so 12. Jackson, would you read it? And
yes. What evidence can you find that Huck is not sentimental about the gangs or fights?
yeah, you remember the situation. They're on board this steamship, and there's only one way off, and there's one boat to get off. And so Huck and Jim take that one boat to get off, dooming these other guys to get off. And remember, they can't get off, and if they try to swim, they'll drown. It's a roaring river, it's a flood. And so when they chose to go on the boat without these men, they were actually dooming them to death, which is what happened. So the question is, what evidence that he's not sentimental? I guess you need to tell me what sentimental means.
I guess sentimental means that you could care for a person, or like, I don't know. I guess the opposite of sentimental is to not really care about somebody. Right?
Well, you know, neither one. What the way that's the way to look at it is sentimentalism is caring too much. It's exaggerating your feelings and emotions. That's what sentimentality is. At least is the way it's used in Huck Finn. That's when you overdo the caring, and so he is not sentimental.
I think I'm kind of sentimental guy sometimes. As
I would have said that, just knowing you the way I do. I would say you're very sentimental. You wouldn't mind crying if you had to. And I'll be honest with you, I can get that way too. There's certain things, there's certain triggers. Sports can be that way to me. I've mentioned, we talked about this, Rudy, a guy who's played high school football will watch Rudy. I bet 9 out of 10, they'll react with it, wow, that's just like it was in my last practice. The story opens with Rudy's last, probably ever practice, but this kid wants to play college football. Christmas can be that way. Most of the Christmas movies are sentimental. They're false. The definition is that it's false. So if you call something sentimental, it's not real. It's not like your uncle died and you're sad and you go to his funeral. Sentimentalism is when some uncle on TV dies and you cry, because that's not real. You suddenly are now crying because you're thinking of all these other things, but what you're seeing is made up. It's not real.
Dang.
So here's a couple of examples. Can I read this to you? Turn in your book. I hope you have your book. It's chapter 13. Don't have the same page number. Okay, why don't you get that? It's chapter 13, the very first paragraph. I'm proving to you that Huck is not sentimental. Now, I'm going to read the first few sentences of that first paragraph of chapter 13.
I thought it
I
was.
get my book in the locker.
Yeah, sure.
I thought it was kind of interesting. Like, I would have thought he wouldn't be very sentimental, but like when he started like thinking about like what he's done with like taking Jim, I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't really expect him to.
Well, it's not sentimental if he has, if he feels sad about Jim, that's because he knows Jim. He, in a sense, loves Jim. He's a real person, they have a real relationship. What you're going to read tonight about a girl who spends all of her spare time writing poems about people who die, people she's never heard of, never seen, and yet she likes to write about people dying. And so that's an example of sentimentality, because it's false. So let me read this to you. He just decided that he and Jim were going to take the boat and doom these guys to death. He says, "Well, I catch my breath and most fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that. For it weren't no time to be sentimental." He even states it out loud. He says, "This is no time to be sentimental." And if you would turn one more place, if you would turn to the end of that chapter, which I cannot help you with the page number. I gotta find it now. It's just a couple of pages. The last paragraph, third paragraph from the end of that chapter, turn there. And it's your book. I would say get out a pencil and mark these. One thing you're going to have to learn to do is use quotations as you read books and you find statements that are useful to prove points. So I would mark this one. It says, "Well, before long comes the wreck." You got that? You got that? All right, so I'm going to read it to you again. It's more proof that he is not sentimental. Now, see, what happened was they took the skiff, they took the boat, and that means the 3 men are doomed to die unless they get some help. So Huck tries to get him some help. He can't. There's nobody he can find to help him. So eventually sees the boat careening down the river, and, well, this is what happens. Well, before long, here comes the wreck with the 3 men on board. Dim and dusky, sliding along down. A kind of cold shiver went through me, and then I struck out for her. She was very deep, and I see in a minute there weren't much chance for anybody being alive in her. So he knows that these 3 men, he contributed to their death, right? He says, "I pulled all around her and hollered a little, but there weren't any answer. All dead still. I felt a little heavy-hearted about that gang, but not much, for I reckoned if they could stand it, I could." And again, think about the lack of emotions there. He caused these people to die. And yet, what was his choice? It was either him and Jim, or it was these guys. And he made the choice most people would make, particularly since they were robbers. They had a gun. They were going to murder this guy. It wasn't safe to try to save him. They all couldn't get off at the same time anyway. but he makes it real clear, I felt a little heavy-hearted, but not much. I personally believe being, I don't know the right word, they're not cold-hearted at all, but being practical about certain things. You're gonna have to make tough decisions. You can't always look back and say, man, I wish I'd done something different. I mean, of course you will, but sometimes you just gotta make tough decisions, say, okay, whatever it is, I'll live with, because I got choice A and choice B. And I think it's really healthy not to beat yourself up about that. Notice, the very last sentence. Look at the very last sentence of the chapter, turn there. He says, by the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east, so we struck for an island and hid the raft and sunk the skiff, and turned in and slept like dead people. You know, he says slept like dead people, because the whole chapter was about that. Okay, guys, if you just kind of stay with me, I keep hearing you, but I don't understand what you're saying, Ben. I keep hearing the noise that's coming out of you.
You laughed out loud.
All right, so that's the answer. It's a long answer, but I expected that you heard that. So let's go to 13. Alistair, read it.
Chapter 13, say 14.
Question.
Huck tries to make a game out of the incident in which Jim and he are separated and lost in the fog. What trick does Huck play on him?
Can you answer it?
Oh. No, it just slipped my mind.
What?
Just slipped my mind.
Anybody remember? I think we answered it yesterday in an earlier question. Anybody remember? Yeah.
He like tells Jim it was a dream, because like he was sick, right?
Right, and why was the fog a significant part of the plot? What did the fog prevent them from doing?
They prevented him from going on the
Right path.
Right.
The Ohio River.
Yeah.
Remember, they were trying to get to the Ohio so they can go north, so Jim can be free. And once they pass the Ohio River, they're in trouble, because they can't turn the raft around and float up a river, so they're gonna have to make other plans, which are also gonna be thwarted here in a minute. The other plans were to go to shore and walk back up the river, buy steamboat tickets and so forth. But, so the fog was really important. So they got separated by the fog, and the question is, he played this joke on him. So that's 13. 14, when Jim figures out it's a joke, that Huck was just joking about being on the raft the whole time. Huck, or Jim, calls him boss, and I don't have the page number. It's chapter 15, so if you turn there. And I don't know the page. I'm gonna read this portion now, see if you can find it. How, I'm gonna start with the word how. Why ain't you been talking about my coming back and all that stuff as if I had been gone away? You see that? Find it. I'm trying to do this so you'll realize that this is part of literary analysis, is you got to go back and find direct quotations to prove your point. You see that? I don't know the page number. How, why ain't you been talking about my, why ain't you been talking about my coming back, all that stuff, as if I'd gone away? You see that? All right. And then Jim said, Huck Finn, you look at me in the eye. Look at me in the eye. Ain't you been away? Or ain't you gone away? And Huck says, gone away? Why, what in the nation do you mean? I ain't been gone anywhere. Where would I go to? And then Jim says, well, looky here, boss. There's something wrong. There is. He calls him boss. He normally calls him honey, just kind of a term of endearment. He's old enough to be Huck's father. And so he kind of treats him like his son. And then later, when he realizes the truth and realizes it's a joke, well, they haven't asked you. Have they asked you that? Let's see. Well, let's answer the question in 14. Why is it significant that he calls him boss? Because he's not using that term of endearment. He realizes that Huck is kind of playing him, And so that's what many white person would do maybe to Jim. You know, he's no longer honey, he's no longer son, he's no longer buddy. He's just like every other white guy who could play jokes on him. Because then 15, would you read that one, Tucker?
Yep. Hang on one second. When Jim realizes he has been tricked, how does he respond? Well, we were just talking about it. He was frustrated with Huck, and he was disappointed in him.
They had a relationship. They had a good relationship. They looked out for each other. Jim was upset that Huck might have died, because out there in the fog, in the water, you don't know what would have happened. When Ben's ready, I'd like you to read 16.
Amen. 16.
Yes, sir.
After Jim's response, what does Huck do? What has he learned? After Jim's response, Huck feels kind of bad for Jim.
And what does he do?
He apologizes.
He does. Why is that significant? He even says it. Let's turn to the last page of chapter 15. The last paragraph of the last page of chapter 15. He says, it was 15 minutes where I could work myself up to it and humble myself to it. And notice he uses the N word. It's not Jim. It's not Buddy, your friend. He calls him a racial slur. But I done it, and I weren't ever sorry for it afterwards neither. I didn't do him no more mean tricks. And I wouldn't have done that one if I'd known it would have made him feel that way.
Was that Huck just talking to himself?
Yes. So the fact that Jim was a slave, that made apologizing to him almost unheard of. You could do anything to a slave and not have to apologize. That's the culture they lived in. So it was very significant. You remember the last time he played a trick on him? Remember it was the previous trick about the snake skin? You remember that one? He puts the snake skin in the bed, in the sleeping bag, and the snake comes and bites Jim. How did Huck feel about that? He felt bad about it, but he doesn't apologize. He doesn't even tell Jim he did it. Jim never knows that was all caused by Huck's joke. So you can tell he's grown. Remember the first time they played a trick on Jim? They took his hat and they moved it, and then they let Jim go on and on about how that was a witch that came, and they were just kind of making fun of him. Huck didn't feel bad at all then. See the progression? He plays a trick on a black man, doesn't feel anything about it. Then he feels bad about it. Then he feels bad enough about it to apologize. So it shows a progression in his relationship to Jim. There was a lot about that chapter that was important. So we go to question, I think it was 17. Scott, would you read it?
Jim and Huck confronts a moral problem, stealing food. What amusing solution to the problem do they find? I can't remember.
Yeah, can't remember where this is anyway. Let me go back. It's chapter. Where does he? I'm not going to bother to find it. You'd have to trust me. Yeah. Well, anyway, nobody remembers that. I feel bad not showing you where it is because I am not making this up. Well, anyway, yeah. I can't find it. Here's the solution to the problem. They decide that they're going to still steal things. Like they go into somebody's crops and they take what they need. And the solution to the problem is, we won't steal certain things. We'll only steal other things. And the things they don't steal are things they don't like anyway, like persimmons and, I don't know what some of the other, I can't, think about the food that you don't like. That would be the kind of stuff you wouldn't steal. And so their solution to the problem was, yeah, I found it. It's in chapter 12. He says, but toward daylight, we got it all settled satisfactory and concluded to drop crab apples and persimmons. So they're gonna still steal things. They're just not gonna steal things that they don't like, which is just absurd, but that's, all right, so, question number 18, Ryan.
What in their talk about King Solomon, Huck thinks Jim has missed the point of the story. What do you think Jim is trying to tell Huck about parents and children and his trade? Wait, his tirade against King Solomon?
Of course, what's the most famous story in the Bible about King Solomon? Right, he threatened to cut a baby in half because two women claimed it for his own, and what was his reasoning there?
Because the real mother wouldn't want to, but the fake mother would be okay with it.
Right, the real mother, no real mother would want her child to be cut in half. So the fake mother in this case said, yeah, go ahead, because it wasn't her baby to begin with, and that's how he noticed that. He tells that story to Jim, and Jim's upset about it. And you remember what Jim said about it? He took it literally. He took it literally that well, I don't know what Solomon would have done. I doubt if he'd have killed the baby, but he says, if you had a whole bunch of children, then I can see why you might cut one in half because you wouldn't miss him. But if you only have a few children, you would never cut one in half. And it's kind of endearing to Jim because that was just an illustration. But he took it seriously, like Solomon really would have cut him in half. And it shows you how much he values children. There's going to be a scene coming up, it'll just kind of break your heart, about his own daughter. What's Huck learning about slaves by living with Jim all these weeks on the boat? What are some of the things you might be learning?
They're actually really nice people.
And real people.
Real people.
Yeah, they're real. Now, they're slaves that are real mean people and bad people, and there were slaves that were good people, but they're not bad or good because they're slaves. I think that's the problem with racism. We stereotype a whole group of people. Doesn't mean the whole group is actually good. Just no group is everybody's good. But you judge them not based on their skin color, but like Martin Luther King said, you judge people based on the character of the content of their character. All right, so how about 19? Would you do that one, Julie?
Huck uses logic to prove to Jim that it is natural and right for correcting the fault of different language. When Jim points Huck on his own logic, how does Huck avoid admitting to himself that Jim has beaten him in the argument?
Can you answer the question?
I don't really remember.
All right, turn to the end of chapter 14. Start with the word shucks. It ain't calling you anything. So Huck is trying to tell Jim about French people, and the kings and all that. And he says, suppose that a man came to you and said, "Parlez-vous français?" What would you think? And Jim says, I wouldn't think nothing. I'd take and bust him over the head. That is, if he wasn't white. And that's an interesting comment. He'd beat somebody up if they weren't white. He can't beat a white person up because he'd be in trouble. Then this is where we'll start. Huck says, shucks, it ain't calling you anything. It's only saying, do you know how to talk French? So they're talking about the French language. And Jim says, well, then why couldn't he say it? And Huck says, why, he is a saying it. That's a French way of saying it. Then Jim says, well, it's a blame ridiculous way, and I don't want to hear no more about it. There ain't no sense in it. Looky here, Jim. Does a cat talk? Now listen to this logic. Does a cat talk like? He's trying to explain why Frenchmen don't talk like Jim and Huck. And Huck says, looky here, Jim. Does a cat talk like we do? No, a cat don't. Well, does a cow? No, a cow don't neither. Does a cat talk like a cow? Or a cow talk like a cat? No, they don't. It's natural and right for them to talk different from each other, ain't it? He says, course. And ain't it natural and right for a cat and a cow to talk different from us? Why, most surely is. Well then, why ain't it natural and right for a Frenchman to talk different from us? You answer me that. Now listen to what Jim does. Is a cat a man, Huck? No. Well, there ain't no sense of cat talking like a man. Is a cow a man, or is a cow a cat? No, she ain't neither of them. Well then, ain't no business to talk like either one or the other of them. Is a Frenchman a man? Yes. Well then, Dad blame it, why don't he talk like a man? You answer me that. And Huck can't answer him because it's flawless logic. You're saying cats don't talk like cows, so cats don't talk like men. Now Frenchmen don't talk like us. And he says, well, is a Frenchman a cat? Is a Frenchman a cow? No, a Frenchman's a man. So why don't he talk like a man? And Huck says this, I see it weren't no use wasting words. You can't learn and he uses the N word again, a slave to argue, so I quit. So you see what Huck does when he's outsmarted. He goes back to the N word, and he calls Jim that word because you can't teach the N word. You can't teach a slave anything. So I just think it shows us that Jim is a real person, and he's smart. He's just not educated, and he's a slave. All right. I know we spent a lot of time on that, but I think it's really an interesting little scenario. Yeah. Yeah, let's just finish. We're almost finished here. All right. What is ironic about feeling guilty? Yeah, we'll deal with this. Remember, Huck tries to turn Jim in. And why doesn't he? Did these slave catchers come down? Why doesn't he turn them in?
Because he thinks about how nice he was to him and stuff.
Now you're mumbling. I can't hear it.
He said tells Huck about how nice Huck is to him, and so Huck feels guilty that he would actually turn him in.
That's good. Yeah, Emma.
I was gonna say that Jim calls him a friend, and he feels guilty now that he knows that Jim really cares about him.
Right. So you see what he's doing here. He's gotten to know Jim, and he can't hurt Jim because he likes Jim, and Jim likes him.
Maybe go ahead.
So that's the situation. But listen to question 20. What is ironic about Huck feeling guilty for helping Jim escape and for knowing that Jim plans to steal back his children that belong to a man that I didn't even know, a man that hadn't ever done me no harm? So he feels guilty about what? What does he feel guilty about? He feels guilty about helping Jim escape and buy his own children back. That's what he feels guilty about. But then when he tried to do it, he also felt guilty about turning him in. Remember what his answer was? He says, well, if I'm going to feel guilty about doing the right thing, and I'm going to feel guilty about doing the wrong thing, then there's no difference in it between right and wrong. I might as well do just the easiest thing. And the easiest thing was to not to turn Jim in. So, you have to understand that Jim or Huck never criticizes slavery. He loves Jim. Jim's a slave, but he's not able to translate that to a decision about, is slavery a bad thing? He never says that. And finally here, the Mississippi River is richly complex symbol. Two questions. First one, how does the river serve as a natural force to help Huck and Jim? So let's just finish with this two things. How is it helpful to him and Jim?
It's a way of transportation.
Exactly. And it's safer because he's a runaway slave. They're safer on the river than they are on land. They could run away on the land, but they're not as safe that way. How else does it help him? It's transportation and it's safety, but how else does it help he and Jim? Well, where do they get their food besides sometimes stealing it? They fish. They live off the river. And how is it helping Huck? It is transportation, and it's the same thing for Jim, but how is it helping out? How is Huck helped by the river? If it weren't for the river, what would Huck, perhaps, how would he be in trouble?
Gets him away from his dad.
Right, it's a mode of freedom. So he gets to experience freedom because of the river. All right, but what are the dangers of the river?
It's gonna take him back to the south if you don't.
The irony is now he's headed in the exact same direction he ran away from home to avoid. Jim is now heading down south. That's where he was going to get sold, down south. And now there's no way for them to get back up unless they go back on the land, which is, again, dangerous. Any other ways that the river is dangerous?
Steamboats.
Steamboats and fog. We've already seen the fog. The fog could have killed them.
Yeah.
Not the fog itself, but it could have caused them to, and then other steamboats could run into them. So it's a mix of good and bad. All right, so good job. I think that's all we need to do with that. I'm gonna give you, we got 15 minutes. I have one last assignment. You can do this on your own. Would you get out your Emily Dickinson poems? This will be the last poem I think we'll do. Would you find that? You can do it in 15 minutes. Yeah, that's it. That looks like it. All right, it looks like this. We've done the poems in here that we wanted to, except for this last one. I'm asking you to do the very last poem. Well, it's the next to last poem. Called A Narrow Fellow in the Grass. It's right here. And there are 3 or 4 questions, the very last, there are 3 questions at the end. And I'm going to come around and check that those questions we just went over. I don't have. The very last 3 questions, which is the poem, I like it, Narrow Fellow in the Grass, which is right here. All right, I'm gonna come around and check the questions we just went over for 12 through 16. I'm looking for the question, we just went over the 1 through 22.
It wouldn't, that guy. No.
I mean, it would be the beginning, right? No.
Let's see, you got it, didn't I? Sorry. This this is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
You leaned over.
And I asked you to do this, and you can do it before you leave, it's just a short one.
We left on that. Wait, Alistair. You said you were watching Daddy at home yesterday? Daddy at home. Is that what you told me yesterday?
Because I could not stop the death.
Oh, it's good. Oh, it's good. You said you were watching Daddy at home yesterday? That's what I thought you said.
Yeah, yeah.
There's 22.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
I mean, that comes first.
So, because I could not stop the death. Would you say? Yeah. Because I could not stop the death, it's another colon by my addiction, wherever your own addiction is.
I think you said that, Jackie.
What?
That's
It's probably in here, let me just get it to you.
I'll beat you up.
Guys, we got 10 minutes, you can get this done, and you won't have to worry about it. And if you, when you finish the short form, let me see it.
That one's
You check this part too, or just the consistent question?
No, I wanted to see the poem too.
That's, it's just these three questions.
Yeah.
Well, you